All right, I want to give some time now to Brian here. So again, he was one of the great four horsemen that we had up there on the screen. Brian Swimme is a wonderful, like Bob introduced me, I'm going to introduce Brian the same way, a wonderful person. I've had a chance to hang out with him some during this project. Mathematician, cosmologist, author, award-winning video producer, professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies right across the bay here in San Francisco. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Professor Brian Swimme.
I'm here for help. Ed has already introduced our project. Our aim is to present a vision for our grandchildren. We want to find a way to make less likely their depression, their cynicism, their opioid addiction. That's what we're looking for. Some way to counteract the attraction that working for a corporation offers with a giant salary while carrying out activities that nobody's in favor of. So I'm going to throw the ideas out and really wonder about it. I mean, what a great group. Gathered together by Terry mainly, but also Ben in particular, and just to draw upon our own experience, what vision might work for our grandchildren? So the first question is, what are the functions that such a vision needs to have? The first one, picking up on Marshall McLuhan, Bob. Where's Bob? Yeah. Bob made that amazing point. He said that Marshall McLuhan identified the way in which a loss of identity leads to violence. So what's a way of providing an identity for the young people? And we have learned things that no one has known in the history of humanity and about the universe. And this is one way of providing an identity. Here I'm going to quote my friend Ty Cashman, who just captured it so completely. So this is the kind of thing that can be spoken to young people in our era and never in the past. So it's another moment in human consciousness. Ty writes, "We are standing on the surface of this mid-sized rock with a hot iron core that generates a protective magnetosphere high overhead, surrounded and supported by a magnificent array of plants and animals that somehow emerged initially from the wet, rocky surface and then were sculpted by the combination of their fragility and the limited resources of the planet into a branching series of millions of specialized generations over billions of years." This is true of every one of us. It's certainly true of the young people. So it provides an identity that we hold in common. That's one of the powerful opportunities we're trying to celebrate. I want to expand this out and include the universe as a whole very, very quickly. So here's my short version. It is, we started as stars. We became molten planets, or at least one molten planet that we know about in particular. The molten planet developed oceans and continents over the molten rock. Then it developed autogens and the biosphere. Then it developed a conscious planet. Now, to say this moment that we're in now is a conscious planet, it's picking up on what Francis has his own way, distributed consciousness, global brain. There are different ways of talking about this. But just as a simple way of identifying it, it's a moment. We're at the moment when the geosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, the biosphere are now encircled by the noosphere. So they're in a simple in like a simple one line is a way of providing identity. I mean, it's an amazing identity. What every one of our grandchildren would learn is that we are an element of a creative energy that over 14 billion years did such astounding things. That's who we are. Ultimately, that's who we are. And as a way of this vision, as a way of easing us out of visions that are so puny, we're all going insane. We can't live inside these little puny visions of who we are. Okay. So the first challenge, first function of a vision is identity. There it is. The second would be a vision for young people has to identify the fundamental challenge of our time. Every era that we know about in human history had fundamental challenges. Sometimes it's an overriding challenge, which is our case. So the challenge of our time is that we live in a civilization which we've constructed. We live in a civilization that is carrying out the most violent destruction of life in 65 million years. That's the challenge of our time. It's never been a challenge for earlier humans. It's our challenge. The important thing about giving a challenge to young people, we believe, is that it's got to be something that draws out their nobility. The challenge of dealing with a destruction that is this immense is something they can live for. It's something that provides meaning and direction. Beyond the idea of what are we offering them now? Well, getting a job and getting a lot of money and then and living a lucrative lifestyle. I mean, that is why we have so many of our young people drop into suicide and drug addiction and all the rest. It's because what we're giving them is so puny, and they know on some deep level that won't work. That's not for them. That's not what they want. So there is a challenge. So in a simple sense, I would say, I put it this way. The challenge we have before us is to reinvent our civilization. But even that, I think, is not as deep as what is required. The challenge before us is to reinvent what it means to be human at that level. So we are in the process of giving birth to a new form of the human species. The human species is amazing. It reinvents itself without changing its anatomy. And we are in one of those moments. I mean, a young person can, oh, God, something wakes up. Something wakes up deep within a young person who's thinking at that level. You know. So then, the third, we have to provide, the vision has to provide a sense of how this happened. How did this happen that we'd end up creating a civilization that's destroying the planet? And here's where Teilhard's thinking comes in a central way. For over 3 billion years, species evolved as they adapted to different conditions. They move up the mountain, or the climate would change, and suddenly it's freezing cold, and they would change. They would adapt. So this process continued and resulted in this amazing fecundity and diversity of life. Then we come to the human being. Something different happens because we invented symbolic language that we could store outside of ourselves. So then as the challenges came up for the human story, the human journey, we didn't have to alter our anatomy. We could alter our minds, our consciousness. We could develop technology and skills because we were accumulating knowledge in a way that couldn't happen with other species. So we became We became a species with a 200,000-year-old mind. And we didn't fan out. We didn't diversify anatomically. What we did instead is to deepen our unity, a single species. The human species is no longer one species among many. The human species has altered in a fundamental way the evolutionary dynamics of a planet. Natural selection is no longer in charge the way it once was. Now it's cultural selection. It's what humans are deciding in thought. This envelope of thought has become a conscious planet. That's what I mean when I say a conscious planet. We now have a planet where an envelope of thought is making the central decisions of evolution. It isn't genetic mutation, and it is natural selection. So then the last point, so then the question is, how did it happen? And the last point the vision has to provide is, where are we going? What is the future? What does it mean? And this is, the phrase here I picked up, I guess from Eric Vogelin, but a leap in being. It's the whole idea of a leap in being. And in a phrase, we have to leap from being a mammalian species to a recognition that we are a planetary force. We have developed the power that matches the biosphere, that matches the hydrosphere. And we're proceeding as if we are just a mammalian species. That's the great leap of being we have to make. So you see, just to tie it into artificial intelligence, if you're a mammalian species, you're a mammal, you need to find free energy. You've got to acquire free energy. You've got to nourish yourself. You can pass on offspring, right? And so that's what we've done. And it's been fantastic for 230 million years, right? But it doesn't work when a species becomes the power of a planet. So for instance, we have companies like Google behaving as if they're mammals. And so their operating system is exactly the same as a shrew's. Find free energy, right? Reproduce. So that all of our powerful computation is used to find a way to gather in the attention, as Tristan Harris was saying. Suck the attention out of our minds. And they don't care about the attention. They care about the advertising dollars that follow from this. So we can't use our artificial intelligence or our technology as if we're a single species. We have to find a way, we have to develop the wisdom to manage the power we've generated as if we were a planet. Got kind of carried the way there. Sorry. But it is this sense of just going back, and so it's a sense that it's not exactly. See, another thing a vision has to do is to identify good and evil. There has to be a way in which that can be pointed to, and nobody likes the word evil, so I won't use it. But we do. The vision has to be able to identify formerly adaptive traits that have become maladaptive as we have made this transition from one species to planet. Formerly adaptive traits that have become maladaptive. So it's maladaptive to build an economy that is based on the notion of the accumulation of capital. That has become maladaptive. It was okay when we were just one species among many, all right? But now we're just sucking all the energy from all the other species. So we need a kind of wisdom that as we move forward with our technology, we're not asking the question, how do I get profit? How do I get free energy? We're asking a different question. The question that we have to use for the creation of artificial intelligence and all our technology is this question. How do we participate in this extremely complex and elegant system of ecosystems? How do we participate with that in a way that's mutually enhancing? That's the question we have to ask. Okay, so Ben and Ed and Terry and Ty, we're looking for. I would love to hear any ways this might connect. Paul, can I start with you?
Well, thank you for a great introduction to a set of pretty serious challenges that we're also worried about. And in some sense, internationally, an agenda has been defined to answer these challenges in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. We might not necessarily agree with all of them, but at least I think there's a recognition at that sort of level of the governance of the planet. So what we have done is we've been looking at that from this perspective of science and technology to say, well, how can we build a science and technology that can support the advancement of these Sustainable Development Goals? And what we focused on are three elements of this, which is essentially identity, health, and education. And so we started an initiative called Sapiens 5. You can find it online, sapiens5.org, where we really pose this question, okay, what's this next phase of humanity? That you sketched it really well, right? We're at this abyss. We need a transition. So then what's that transition? What's this next phase of humanity? This is the fifth phase, right, after the Neolithic revolution, the Industrial Revolution, information revolution, so on. Exactly. So this is our fifth phase, right? And I feel that in that context, we have to really think about augmentation. That's also what you mentioned in your talk, right? Is the augmentation project. And I feel this is, and it resonates very well with how you were describing the problem. What we're facing are limitations in the human capability to comprehend the problems we're facing and to respond accordingly. Let's look at the mismatch of timescales, right? It's really difficult for most of us to imagine the geological spatial temporal scales at which problems of global warming are playing out. So again, yesterday, right, Al Gore lands in Australia and they have an extreme weather event and it's snowing. So people say, oh, you see, it's all nonsense, global warming, right? So this is just a limitation of human cognition. And so I think this is really where we have to start to attack the problem. Global warming is just a symptom, right? Because we are the problem. So for me, this is really the fundamental challenge. How can we fix human limitations, human fallibility, in terms of our governance structures, but also in terms of our individual decision making? And that's the next phase of humanity, and that, I think, will require augmentation, and that's why we emphasize very much issues of identity, education, and health. And concretely, that means for identity, we are embedding this, grounding this really in history, in social-cultural history. For instance, we have developed a large project around the Holocaust and Nazi crime commemoration and memory in Europe, because I believe this is a very important source and a very important historical mirror to indeed challenge people with their puny ideas about identity, right? It's sort of like a recalibration attempt. This history in itself is important, but it also has a function for us as a society. So this is why we're pushing that project. Then in education, we look very much at sort of how do we return agency to the learner. I mean, our educational system started with Frederick the Great, and he wanted to just train better soldiers. So that's why schools are set up in a very militaristic, authoritarian way. So the first thing we do is rob the learner of their agency. And that's the last thing you want to do. So how do we return? I will talk about this tomorrow as well, actually. Then in terms of health, we focus on brain health, because if we don't have healthy brains, we don't have healthy decision making. And there we have embarked on a huge project in neurorehabilitation to think about just better intervention methods, better diagnostic methods for brain health, because this is really the predicate, right, on which everything has to be built. Okay, so that's the so the derived projects are then future memory. So you can look at futurememoryfoundation.org for the Holocaust and Nazi crime project, and we are commercializing the neurorehabilitation techniques I will talk a bit about tomorrow. But we have been looking at these problems really from a very concrete perspective. It's not only wringing your hands and saying like, oh, we're in trouble. I think it's very important that we look at what gives us traction to make some progress, you know. It's nice to talk about global consciousness, great, but it's not solving anything, right? What really matters to me is how do we gain traction on the ground and making palpable, measurable progress. And there we have at least some evidence that we're making progress. Whether this leads to global consciousness, for me, is a secondary problem then. Right? But it's really about what's the real stuff we're doing. Right?
Yeah, I don't think I have enough thoughts formulated to be intelligent on it, but it feels like that's exactly where it's echoing, is our ability to comprehend the exponential really is a roadmap in the sort of, as we understand the exponential, that we can find a path towards what you're talking about. And one thought, historically, it'd be worth looking. There's a very peculiar movement back around the 1930s called the technocrats. And they only lasted for a very few years. And my sense was they were hitting a large nail not quite on the head. But that original chart I put up with the multiple outcomes, that was first proposed by their economist, King Hubbert, who, anybody in this room recall Hubbert's curve? Same King Hubbert. So I would also mine that space. I'm going to hand the mic to someone smarter than me, which would be anyone else in this room.
We have a revolutionary idea, which is very simple, which is to connect St. Mary's. You're at CIIS? Every now and then. There's a place called UC Berkeley that is surrounded by CTNS, surrounded by 7 big theology departments, and then there's Cal States everywhere. So my proposal, very simple, is that we talk to each other and design a course. And like I'm here at Berkeley, and I would love to see a humongous course taught on this topic to the young ones. And it's relatively simple to do. We've got to educate the young ones in college on how to do it. And we've got in this area right here, St. Mary's, blah, blah, blah. We can do it. We should just get together and design a course where we talk to and the various people in the neighborhood would visit the different institutions.
It should be. Okay. Yeah, I know nothing of this. I just arrived in the situation, but I have a couple of things I'd like to add. They're probably like random things at this point, but they may be able to be synthesized later. And these are things that I've just noticed. One of the things I was talking about and trying to work with is the notion that we're missing a dimension in terms of our understanding of how we live. And we tend to think in terms of the public dimension and the private dimension. But prior to this is the participant dimension. And we participate in the system continuously, and on that basis we get to have public order and private thoughts. And we spend a whole lot of time going back and forth between public and private, but the whole business of participation is simply just off the chart, off the table. But it's right there, it's working on us all the time, and I think one of the things we want to do is develop an ability to sense it, to have some sense about where we are heading. So the pronoun that belongs to the participant dimension is we. And it's not what I'm doing, it's not what you're doing, it's what we're doing. And then we get to do I and you. And so I think that could help us if we would start to be aware of the possibility of a participant dimension and then start to develop some kind of ability to sense it. We do. I think this right here is all about some kind of, suddenly we're aware of some kind of participant movement thing that's going on that is below our kin. And then suddenly we're trying to suddenly become aware of what it is. So that's one possibility. That's just one thing I'll throw in.
Thank you. Wonderful. All of these. Terrific. Great. Time for a coffee break, I think.
And Stanley proposed something very practical, and I think we should do it. So, since you were the one that proposed this, no, since you proposed that we have to deal with the youth, and since you proposed it, you two guys have to get together and make it happen. All right, so we've now formed an action committee.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. All those who are opposed, just leave. So,
Example, because we talk about our limitations, and I don't think we are sufficiently aware of the urgency with which we have to act. Right? Starting a course is a great start, but it's already too late in some sense. We really have to think very carefully about perturbations to the system that can really help us to gain traction more rapidly than waiting for this next generation of students we're going to train. So we need action now. We have a few examples in our project in Europe that I'm happy to discuss with anyone and to disseminate and share with anyone. If others have other concrete interventions that give us traction, let's talk about that, because we need action now and not tomorrow.
If Doug Engelbart were sitting in this room, he'd be nodding vigorously in agreement. And his term augmentation referred to something very specific, which is we don't just have to improve, we have to use our improvements to improve our improvements to get to a nonlinear acceleration, exactly the sense that you were just describing, that we have to use our tools to make the tools better. And I think that's how you get beyond the sense that, it was the example I think I gave about the fire trucks, that fires grow exponentially, fire trucks accelerate arithmetically. So the fact is, under the classic model, even as the fire truck is accelerating, it's falling further behind. It's like the Red Queen, or worse than the Red Queen. And so that you have to find a way to get it, augmentation in it, to make sure that it doesn't just accelerate linearly, that you accelerate exponentially at the solution level.
Hello, you know me, I'm Annette Grathoff. I'm actually the General Secretary of the IS4SI. So putting just up your idea and your idea that we have some organization which we could stabilize so that people meet there, why don't we use the basis we still have, which is the IS4SI community, to build up a forum where scientists can do discussions and can bring into their ideas. We also have the Foundation of Information Science Forum, but we need a forum which is actively managed by an IT expert who knows how to do a forum and who knows how to manage the community so that we can discuss together in a way which is sustainable, which works. So who can build up a forum for our society which is modern enough to attract people who have the knowledge and to attract the members, which we already have, and to make the possibility great that others won't want to join as members of our society, and that we have those great scientists together. I know that Terry already has the idea and that he wants to mention some ways how to make it at the General Assembly. So I know that at the General Assembly this is for members, but why not make an assembly of people who want to contribute to the study of information theory and the study of information science inside our community?
I think that we tend to plan for ourselves, but the most powerful influence we can have is with our young.
I wanted to follow up on that point. McLuhan said the medium is the message. And if we want to get to the youth, we got to think about how we're going to pry them away from their smartphones. I've been to many conferences like this, and a lot of gray hair. There's not many young people. I mean, Annette is our young person, right? And she's got a PhD and a lot of experience. How do we get to the high school kids? How do we get to the grammar school kids? How do we get them off of their mesmerized or little zombies walking around with their smartphone? So
Give them tools that they're very familiar with. We give them educational tools that use augmented reality and virtual reality and social networking, which is completely in their language. And they go off with it and they learn stuff and they engage. And this is the big change that, again, we empower the learner, we give agency to, it's not some gray-haired person that tells them what to think. That's what they've been trying for centuries. It's not very effective, right? So we have to really empower the learner and use modern tools to do that. And that's what we're doing, and it's extremely effective. But our big problem is scaling, because you're up against, let's say, the politics of different environments. You're up against the politics and the industrial economical organization of, let's say, education systems, right? You might have the best science and the best ideas, but that's still not enough, right? So you need also, let's say, you need lobbying, you need the right context, you need politics. And that's where we're weak. But in terms of real tools that are proven to work, we're doing better than most. So that's not our problem. Scaling is the problem.